So when my daughter was an infant, I remember one time I was walking into the house. I've got the pumpkin seat in one hand, I've got groceries in the other. I'm trying to fumble with the keys. I'm trying to get in the house, get the dogs to move back so I can walk in. And I realized at that moment how important it is to have not just a physical cue or a hand cue, but also to have a verbal cue.
I could be a mess, stressed in yesterday. He don't care less. He sees me anyway. Yeah, he sees me anyway. My dog thinks I'm great. He thinks I'm number one. He never hates, even when I'm done.
Welcome to another episode of Dog Leads. My name is Steve Bishop. I'm a certified dog trainer. I have a BA in psychology and a minor in sociology, and I've been training professionally for about 15 years, both group classes and private clients. If you're in mid-Missouri and you're interested in training or would like me to speak to your group, you can contact me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com. This episode is brought to you by It Goes Without Saying What Our Dogs Are Trying to Tell Us. It's November 1st, and I'm repeating it on January 10th at 11 o'clock. If you'd like to improve your relationship with your dog by learning their language, this presentation is for you. Pre-registration is required, and I'll leave a link down in the description. To train behaviors, I like to use three different methods: capturing, approximations, and usually what I use is luring. This is not for behavior modification, so things like aggression and anxiety, but just to learn cues like your sit and down and recalls and that type of thing. Capturing is just waiting for the dog to do the behavior, whatever it happens to be, and then reinforcing that so they're more likely to do it again. So, for example, I have a lot of people that come to my puppy classes and the dog already knows how to sit. That's because they have captured that. They see the dog about to sit, they might put a word with it, or they're saying sit and the dog's like, well, I'm not sure what's going on, and so I'm going to sit down and think about it, and when they sit, they get reinforced for that. So that's capturing. And then approximations or shaping, that's just having the dog make small steps to the terminal behavior or the final behavior, the behavior that we're looking for. So, for example, I see that puppies have a lot of problems doing a down, and I think it has to do with the fact that they're already so small they don't want to get smaller because it's kind of intimidating, and we'll talk about that in probably a later episode. So one of the things we'll try is we'll ask the dog for a down, and maybe they will just put a paw a little bit forward, lower their shoulder a little bit, and we'll reinforce that and call that a down until they're doing it consistently. Once they're doing it consistently, then we put that on extinction, or we stop reinforcing it, but maybe they have the one paw out and then the other one comes out, so both shoulders are lowered. And then you just keep going until they get lower and lower, reinforcing one behavior and putting the previous behavior on extinction until you get the down that you want. And I've said before, it's easy to talk through this stuff really quickly, but approximations, they can take a couple of weeks. So don't try and rush it. Try and get 4 to 7 consistent, flawless behaviors before you move to the next step. So lowering that shoulder 7 times in a row before you start looking for both paws to come out and both shoulders being lowered. Those types of things. Luring is just having the dog follow the treat into position. So for example, and I'm using a sit a lot because it is a pretty simple behavior, but using the lure, I'll take the treat, show it to the dog right up against the nose practically, and I bring my hand up just a little bit so the head lifts, and like a seesaw, the back end will go down, and then I bring my hand straight over their back so that as they follow the treat, butt hits the floor, we get the sit. Reminder, a reinforcer is anything that the dog will work for. to the exclusion of anything else. I've mentioned before Duncan, he just loved tennis balls. I use those in my training as much as possible. I would not use them for a stay because the whole point of the tennis ball is for him to chase it and bring it back. But maybe recalls, I might use it for something like that. So think about what you're using. We use food because every dog is motivated by food to some extent, but some dogs are more motivated by some other reinforcer. So use what works for your dog. I want to expand a little bit on something I've said before, and I knew I was going to get to this, so I just kept putting it off a little bit, and hopefully I didn't confuse the subject or overcomplicate the subject. So when I am training, I cannot say I won't use positive punishment. So again, we go back to that example of my art class where we were critiquing each other's work. We're adding something, that critique, to decrease a behavior, whether it's poor composition or shading or whatever it happens to be. Okay, technically that is positive punishment. So it wasn't a bad thing, but it was positive punishment. Again, chewing on the furniture, we want to interrupt that behavior. So I say no, and I won't go into all of that again, but I say no, the dog stops, and then I give them something else to do. But the no stops the behavior. I've added something to decrease the chewing on the furniture. So all that said, I want to make it abundantly clear, I will never use fear, pain, or intimidation to train a dog. That is a hill I am willing to die on. So the use of shock collars, prong collars, choke collars. I talked about in the episode about looking for a trainer, what are the tools that they use. I use a leash, a collar, treats, and that's it. And I'll expand on this more. Somebody asked me if I would talk about punishment more in depth, so that will be a future episode. I'm still trying to put all of that together, but it is coming. So I will definitely expand on this topic quite a bit. One of the problems with using these aversive tools is, for example, you get a trainer that says, well, I know how much shock to use with a shock collar. My old car, when I would get out of the car in the winter, the air was so dry, I would get shocked a lot of times, and it would just piss me off. Take a good day, turn it into a bad day. The other side of that is I had a shop teacher in junior high who had been a fireman before he started teaching. And he was telling us a story in class one day. There's a house on fire. They were down in the basement, he and another guy. They were checking the fuse box panel to make sure everything was shut down and it wasn't going to cause any more problems, and the guy he was working with was just sticking his finger in all these empty socket holes. Possible he could have gotten shocked, but apparently it wouldn't have bothered him. So you don't know where a person, or in our case a dog, is going to fall on that spectrum. And one of the things you have to think about is what the fallout is going to be. So a good example, I noticed this when I was much younger. The dog we had when I was growing up, whenever he got in trouble, we would roll up a newspaper and swat him with it. That's just what you did at the time, and I didn't know any better. I discovered when I got into my teens and he was getting older, I'd be sitting and started reading the newspaper, trying to keep up on the news, and anytime you took the newspaper and shook it to kind of straighten the pages out, the dog would cower. And I'm sure on an emotional level, he was really stressed anytime he saw us sit down and reading through the paper. The point being, you just don't know what that fallout is going to be. You can't say, well, this is what I used on another dog, so this should be fine for this dog too. Each one's an individual, just like people, and you don't know how they're going to be affected or what their history is with that aversive. So teaching a sit, I think it's really important that you have both a verbal cue and a physical cue. So again, for the example that I used in the introduction, I'm coming in to the house, I've got my hands full, the dogs are right there, I want to be able to tell them back, and they're going to back up. But they're happy to see me, I'm happy to see them, but I got to get in the door. We have a pretty narrow foyer, and so I need that space to get all this pumpkin seat and the groceries and everything else into the door. But the other side of that is, if I was laying on the couch with my daughter when she was that age, she's laying on my chest, she's finally asleep, oh my gosh, we get a break, the dog's getting a little wound up, I want to ask them for a sit or a down, but I don't want to wake the baby, so I want to use the hand signal. So there are these situations where each one can be used. One of the things to remember is dogs are very visually oriented. Most of their communication is visual. So, for example, when we're working on a recall in my classes, a lot of times the people will start to bend over just a little bit before they call the dog, and it's subconscious, but the dogs have noticed it, they've picked up on it. We want to use that to our advantage. When I am teaching a behavior to my dogs, I will start with the physical cue. Once they have that pretty well established, then I'll start adding in the verbal cue. In my classes, because we're on a truncated schedule, the facility where I teach, we have 6-week sessions. I have them do both, but the dogs absolutely pick up on that visual cue before they start really registering or really responding to the verbal cue. With teaching these behaviors, I have a rule in my class: you are not allowed to touch the dog. We don't want to have to physically maneuver the dog into position. So again, when my daughter is laying on my chest, if I have to lean forward and bend over and kind of touch my dog's butt so that he sits, once I start moving around, my daughter's going to wake up. And if you've had a baby, you know how precious those moments are where it's just quiet. You can just sit and relax. Once the dog offers the behavior, whether it's a sit or the down or whatever, lots of pets, lots of praise, lots of rewards, but we just don't want to physically manipulate the dog into position. And in my classes, I talk about, and we actually do some of this, if you're working at a distance, you're not going to be able to ask for the sit, run 20 feet over to your dog, touch them on the butt, and then run 20 feet back. And if you plan on competing in any type, that's pretty much a disqualification, or at least a huge deficit to your points. So luring the sit, what I do is I take that treat and I put it right up against the dog's nose, or pretty close to. Want to make sure we're keeping their attention. And then what I do is I'll raise my hand just a little bit so the head comes up, and as the head comes up, the length of the back is kind of like a seesaw, the butt goes down a little bit. And then my hand goes straight back over the dog's head and over their back, parallel to the ground. The idea is, as the dog's head goes up and tries to follow this treat as it's going back over their back, the butt hits the floor, they go into that sit. Once they're doing that consistently, then you can get a little further back, just kind of raise your hand in an arc up and back a little bit. And then you get a little bit further away and a little bit further away. This will take a couple of weeks, probably at least a couple of days. By doing that, my dogs, for instance, I can hold my hand at my waist, curl my fingers, and they know that means sit. But it started out with this really exaggerated motion right up against their nose. Once they're doing it consistently, then I start adding a word with it. So in this case, sit. So as I'm bringing my hand up, I would say sit, then bring my hand back. And I do that until they're responding consistently. Then I'll try it without the hand. I'll say sit, wait a few seconds. If they don't respond at all, then I'll give them a little bit of a gesture to kind of lure them into position. Do that a couple of times until they're doing it consistently. And again, at the same time, I'm getting my hand further and further away. So that hopefully gives you an idea of the importance of having a verbal cue and a physical cue, and how to kind of implement those. I would love to see your comments, questions. Let me know anything you would like to hear me talk about. You can leave me a comment or email me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com. I am also now on Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio, so if those platforms work better for you, those are available now.